If I was 10 years from retirement, here's where I'd start. Because this is the window most people underestimate. They think they've got time. They think they'll sort it out later. But 10 years out, this is where small decisions still have time to compound, or create problems that are very hard to unwind. And this is something I see quite a lot in practice. People arrive in that final stretch feeling like they're in a good position. But when you look underneath it, there are a few things slightly off. Not big mistakes, just small ones, repeated over time. And they matter more than people expect. The first thing I'd be fixing is spending. Not cutting everything back, not doing anything extreme, just understanding it properly. Because if you're off even by $10,000 a year, that doesn't just affect your lifestyle, it changes how much you need entirely. Over 10 or 20 years, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what I often see is people guessing. They either assume a higher number just to be safe, or more commonly, they underestimate what they'll actually spend. Both can create problems. One delays retirement unnecessarily, the other risks running short later. So this is where it starts, getting that number real. The second thing is your super strategy, because 10 years out, you're still working, you're still earning, and that means you still have time to use one of the most powerful tools available, maximizing your super contributions in this window, while your income is still coming in, can make a significant difference to where you end up. Whether that's salary sacrifice, catch-up concessional contributions, or simply making sure you're not leaving unused cap space on the table. These decisions compound over a decade. Most people focus on returns, but the contributions you make in this window can matter just as much, if not more. The third thing is your structure, because two people can have the exact same balance and be in very different positions. One might be drawing income tax effectively, the other might be losing more than they need to in tax, or fees, or inefficiencies. And that difference compounds. It's not obvious in year one, but over time, it can materially change how long your money lasts. Most people focus on returns, but structure often matters just as much. The fourth thing I'll be looking at is risk. Not whether you're aggressive or conservative, but whether your portfolio actually matches what you need it to do. Because in this phase, you're transitioning from building wealth to relying on it, and that's a different job. If your investments are too conservative, you might not get enough growth. If they're too aggressive, you're more exposed at exactly the wrong time, especially in those early years of retirement. So it's not just about risk, it's about fit. And even with the right risk settings, there's another factor that catches people off guard: timing. They look at their balance and they think, that should be enough. But what they're really doing is compressing the time frame. Instead of funding 20 or 25 years, they're now funding 30 or even 35. That's a completely different equation. Same money, more years, and that pressure builds slowly. Not all at once. And then there's debt. If you're still carrying a mortgage into retirement, that changes everything, because your investments aren't just funding your lifestyle anymore. They're funding your repayments as well. But here's the important point. 10 years gives you a realistic window to reduce or clear that debt before retirement. If you act now, that's not true at 5 years out, or 3. The time you have right now is genuinely useful, because if that debt is reduced or removed, your required income drops significantly, and that can bring forward your retirement, sometimes by years. So when you step back and look at this, it's not one big decision that determines whether you can retire. It's a combination of smaller ones: spending, super strategy, structure, risk, timing, debt. Individually, they don't seem like much, but together, they either support your plan or quietly work against it. And this is where people get stuck. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because they haven't connected how all these pieces interact. So, what should you actually be thinking about? Not just how much do I have, but if your spending is a bit higher, what happens? If markets are weaker earlier on, what happens? If you retire earlier than expected, what changes? Because this is really about flexibility. The more flexible your plan is, the less sensitive it is to things not going perfectly. And this is where it's important to say, this is general in nature, so it's important to consider your own situation because small differences can have a big impact here. But here's the key takeaway. 10 years out, you still have time to fix things properly, but not forever. And the decisions you make in this window have outsized impact on whether you can retire when you want to, and how comfortable that actually feels. Get this window right, and 5 years before retirement become about fine-tuning rather than fixing. That's a very different place to be. If you're approaching retirement and want structured guidance rather than figuring this out alone, I work with Australians in exactly that position. You can find details below.